our field research center that was constructed a few years ago, and where we now have recently built a new facility, an innovative facility to study climate change. I heard that you are all here to bring over to the general public the concerns about climate change that we all have as scientists. And I'm sure that the impact of the weather men, weather women all over the world can be much bigger than the impact of scientists that are studying in a lab in a specific facility. All kinds of difficult, interesting things, but which are difficult to translate to a general public. So I think it's a very nice initiative that Gilles Peters has organized here, I think. Well, I hope you can have a view at the new facility.
We already visited.
Okay, yeah, where we will study climate change, biogeochemical cycles in our heatland ecosystems here in Belgium. This kind of knowledge is quite essential, I think, to understand what will be the effects, the long-term effects of climate change on our climate all over the world. So I'm very happy that you are here, and I hope you can enjoy the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
This is all here now? I'll kick this over.
So, thanks. Pleasure meeting you, meteorologists and weather forecasters. I know very little about meteorology, and I never presented the weather. However, being a psychologist and an economist, I have some perspectives probably on climate communications that are not so usual or common. But the reason why I got started with this was that, having known climate researchers and known particularly Earth system scientists in general, they were despaired about how little politics and the public could understand of what was happening. And particularly one colleague of myself called Jürgen Randers, who wrote Limits to Growth book back in 1972, who's now an old man, he said, for 40 years I tried to change people's thinking, and I've failed. Now I'm a pessimistic, bitter old man, he says, with a smile. Because in his mind, the evidence is so clear now that humanity seems to be destroying our biosphere and our climate, and we're responding too slowly. The reason, he says, is that people are too short-term. People are short-term in their everyday life as individuals. They are short-term in capitalism, with the interest rate giving a short time horizon, and then very short-term in democracies, since we only have typically 4-year horizons for politicians. So it's unable to deal with a long-term problem, he says. So he goes back to this. Is it really the case that humans as such are inevitably, is in our genes, so to say, we are short-term or short-sighted? And this was the question that got me triggered. Is that the case? What do we know from science? What do we know from psychology? Are humans inevitably short-term? Or, as I sometimes do, flip it over and ask, under what conditions can humans take action for the really long term? What does it take to make people think for the long term in their everyday lives? And that's the question I'm going to answer in this next 40 minutes. What do we know about humans' capacity to think long term and take action for the long term in the here and now? You might have heard that climate change is a very difficult problem, a wicked problem, it's sometimes said. It's global, it's abstract, it's huge. But do you know that solving the climate change issue or the global warming is quite simple? And we know the solution. And we know the solution for quite some time, at least 25, 27 years. What you do is, one, put a proper tax on CO2 emissions. 2, use some of those funds to educate particularly women, particularly in developing countries all over the world, which brings down the population rate. And 3, give the rest of the money back to everybody else. 1, 2, 3. We've known this for more than 25 years, so why don't we do it? And here comes my old professor friend and says, because people are short-term. They don't want to pay a little bit now to have a better future. So what do we know? This is the challenge for this. And I want to put it positively as well. Under what conditions can humans take action for the long term? Now, some of the problem is that climate scientists have been communicating their best knowledge in their best way for 25 years, and they typically do it through graphs like this. Here you see 2 scenarios going into the end of 2100. This is where we are now. And there's one warm scenario, business as usual, with emissions growing at about 2% per year, which makes us, puts us in a world 4 degrees warmer. And to get the real horror and tragedy of this across, scientists gave it the incredibly communicative name of RCP 8.5. They did. Look, there they are. And there's a better world, a world we can recognize, a world which is livable for humans. And they give it the incredibly communicative name of RCP 2.6. Now, are you inspired? Or do we have a big yawn? So, what can science say about how people respond to climate science? This is what we call the science of science communication. We now know a lot about the climate system, but we have known until recently too little, I would say, about how people respond to climate science. And that is what I'm going to share with you. After, the first time this graph appeared was in the first IPCC report in 1990, and they've been repeating it for every year more or less since. What has the effect been on the public in general of this very massive climate science communication? Well, what made me really get into this topic was when I found these data here, probably from Norway. We have responses, attitudes of climate. How concerned are you for greenhouse effects and climate change? Going all the way back to the year 1989. This was just after some major environmental issues, such as Chernobyl and some algae blooms, and also the Jim Hansen breaking the news in Congress in 1988. And climate change was a new issue. It went from 0 to a 70% rate of either some or very concerned about the climate change. Only 6% were not concerned. And then science repeated these messages, and the media repeated the way it was framed, and we ended up 25 years later with a much lower concern. So as climate gets more certain, and the more this is pushed, the less concern in the population. That's strange. Can it be only Norwegians that are so stupid?
Yeah.
Yes. So I looked for other data, longitudinal data, that gave a representative sample of the population. And in the US, it started in the same way, about 6 or 7%, and then had gone up and down, but not as much as Norwegians. But still, the trend line is negative, downwards. What about the EU? We don't have numbers going back to 1989. It's only Norway and Sweden, Norway and US that have that, as some of her, I'm aware. How serious a problem do you think global warming, climate change is at this moment, from what scale from 1 to 10? And this is the percent saying very serious on the scale of 7 to 10 in this scale. This is Sweden, this is Germany, this is EU in general. So compared to 2008, the concern level was lower in 2015. The same picture. Other countries, this is from all over the world, Pew Research Center, trying to get representative samples from Latin America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Pacific, Middle East, US and China. In terms of climate change is a very serious problem. Latin America, Africa comes out consistently very high. Climate change is harming people right now. Very concerned that climate change will harm me personally. And the average global median is 54%. So on the one hand, it seems that from a global level, climate scientists have been pretty successful in convincing a majority of the people on this earth that climate change is a real concern. Maybe this could translate into a politicians or politics willing to do something with it. However, there's a strange skewed line when it comes to which countries are pro and which countries tend to ignore. So if you ask people, the climate change we're currently seeing is largely the result of human activity. Now the Chinese come up on top, with almost everybody agreeing. Southern countries such as Argentina, Italy, Spain, Turkey, France, India, and we've had Belgium high on the list here, above the total, while Sweden, Germany, and then at the bottom we have countries such as Australia, Great Britain, and the US, which tend to disagree. So some social scientists put up a question mark here. We see a strange correlation between speaking English and discrediting climate science. How can this be? So some researchers started looking into, is there any correlation here between the CO2 emissions per capita and their concern for climate? And the thing was, it came out very clearly. Higher CO2 emitters are less concerned about global warming. This is the concern level, high, low, and this is how many tons per capita people emit. The United States, lowest concern, highest emissions. And then you have a correlation rate of 0.54 over there. So sorry for using so many graphs and technical things. We'll not get into the psychology, but just wanted to know the main results of the current surveys that have been done. Unfortunately, there is no proper survey. We're using standardized questions over long term for all countries in the world. That's why I can't give you all answers about the different countries and how and why things are developing. This field is a bit too young still. But we know quite a bit, particularly in OECD countries, wealthy countries, Western countries. The public tends to think that climate scientists disagree. Only half believe that climate scientists agree on global warming, when in reality it's more than 97%. This is what I call the psychological climate paradox. How can it be? Why can it be that with increasing certainty of the science, we have a falling concern over time, particularly in richer countries with a high level of CO2 emissions? So this seems to be something strange going on there, because it runs counter to the conventional, rational way of thinking about things. So about 8 years ago, I started reviewing the scientific literature. I found about 300 articles that wrote about the perception of climate change. And what I did was to condense those about 300 to 400 articles down to 5 barriers, or 5 defenses, and then 5 solutions. The 5 defenses say why people seem to defend themselves against climate facts, and the 5 solutions show what kind of communications actually create engagement rather than stopping. So what are these 5 defenses then? Why? You can put it this way. The greatest barrier to tackling global warming is about 6 inches thick. It's the distance between your ears. And in this distance between our ears, we find these 5 main barriers. My contribution to this field has been kind of creating this model that shows what happens when a climate message comes in. And what's a climate message? Well, typically, climate message would be, did you know that we just passed 410 ppm of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that's the first time for more than 3 million years? Does that get people engaged? Another version, did you know that now the largest ice berg ever is breaking loose from the West Antarctica ice shelf, and it's an irreversible meltdown of it, which will cause sea level to rise more than 2 meters over the next 200 years. What happens is that there are 5 types of barriers that stop these messages from coming in. And what I hope to contribute is that through you knowing these barriers now, you can reshape your climate communications so they don't hit these barriers, hit these defenses, and fall dead. The first is distance, the second is doom, the third is dissonance, the fourth is denial, and the fifth is identity. So now I'll walk you through each of them. Let's do distance first. Showing this graph here again. What climate scientists have done, of course, again with the best of intentions, is to talk about the year 2100 a lot, and 2050. And politicians too are happy about speaking about lofty goals for the year 2050, because they know they will have no responsibility at that time. So what that does is that the public in general hears, it's not now. That's what, I mean, most of us are busy with our agenda for the next 3 weeks. When did you last make a decision, not just for the next year, but for the next century? Nobody does that. So we position this outside the scope of human attention by using this. You need to have quite a bit of training to get a sense of urgency when you relate to the year 2100. Second, climate scientists have used images like this. This is a melting glacier. How many live close to melting glaciers? How many live close to polar bears? How many knows penguins or have been in a cyclone in the Pacific? It's like when you use these images, people get a sense that this is not here. So they learn it's not now and it's not here. Actually, one study was done in this literature where they asked about 800 people, I think, this following simple question. You can test it in your acquaintances if you want to have a kind of party or family dinner question. And when I say, if I say the term global warming, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? And what they found was that more than 70% of the people came up with an answer that had something to do with melting ice, or polar bears, or something in that range. So by putting it in far off Nordic areas or southern areas, we say it's far away from me. And thirdly, is this visible? This image? Is it? Yeah. Yeah. Showing catastrophic images such as this, where you see the people who are impacted, suffer from climate change or extreme events. I don't know these people. I don't know anybody who knows somebody who knows them. And what we know from climate psychology is that the longer social distance there is between me and those who are suffering, the less empathy I will feel. This is well established from the Milgram series research, for instance. So if there is a very short distance, if I know somebody, then I'll be engaged. And then I can also, maybe as media people are well aware of, if I can tell a story about one of these girls and not tell a story about 1 million of the people displaced, then you get a higher emotional response. Yeah. So that's a way of treating it. But immediately we will respond with less empathy if there's a big social distance between me and those who are suffering. Finally, when it comes to responsibility, who are supposed to do something with this? And what we hear all the time are from big international negotiations, the COPs for instance, where international leaders, executives, prime ministers and so on speak a lot about what should be done and the time for action is now, and other great phrases. And then they agree to meet again the next year. And whatever I do will have no impact on what these people do. So it's kind of outside my scope of influence. That's what people feel. Whatever I do can't make a difference because the decisions are made by other people far away from me. So I feel maybe helpless. These are all outcomes of what we call psychological distancing. And it's very clear in the literature, lots of studies. It reduces the feeling of personal risk. Climate comes out with a low priority because other things that appear closer to me, such as immigration, criminality, healthcare, education, come up much higher. And then on list number 15 out of 16, we find climate change. And then we ask, why don't politicians do something with climate change? And the reason from a democracy point of view is that when politicians look at that list, they don't find many people very concerned about climate change. They will rather talk about things that people are concerned about. So psychological distancing produces a low issue priority, and that low issue priority is then results in a democratic problem, because politicians are not rewarded by doing or implementing the correct solutions for climate change. So that was a bit about the distancing. What about the doom barrier? Let's say you bypass the distance barrier by saying that climate change is here, it's now, we can see it in the weather. Well, if you then continue with the sentence, and if we continue as now, we're going to burn the earth. This is going to get really bad if you guys don't stop emitting CO2. This evokes the apocalyptic framing in people, the doom framing. And doom framing has been employed a lot in this over the last 25 years. These are some classic front pages like Times, be worried, be very worried. And again, we see a sad solar bear or some floating ice here. We have population crashes, vast new deserts, how to survive the century, and large floods, and there are even birds of death, black birds waiting to pick in the flesh of the corpses floating in the flood. So, with too much doom, we psychologists know very predictably what will happen. First, people habituate. Habituation means that you don't respond much anymore. Second, you start to avoid the topic and avoid the messenger. I don't want to listen to these people anymore. They are just doomsday prophets. And actually, I had a friend who was going through some depression for a period. And one day, she was invited by another friend to come along for a lecture on climate. This friend thought my friend should come along because he was so alone. So why don't take her along to something? And then she said, "Oh no, I can't stand another climate lecture. I get so even more depressed." So you start to avoid both the messenger and the messages, and you flip the channel. You want to hear about something else. And finally, you start to stereotype people, because these are just climate hysterics. These are just alarmists. They are doomsday doommongers. And you know, this is a typical environmental lady. What is going to say? Save the planet. You can just go kill yourself. Anybody know something like this? Or have to be projected? So this is, of course, a stereotype being projected at those who come with this kind of message, which makes it difficult for communicators, right? So that's the doom. And then if you avoid the doom barrier, and if you say it's here and now, and you move in towards having people do something, then you quickly come up against this barrier called dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is well known. It happens when what we know conflicts with what we do. So if I know that I should emit less CO2, I should drive less, I should fly less, what happens is that I get this inner uncomfortable feeling. I feel a little bit like a hypocrite, and I start to look for ways to self-justify myself. So I can see that if I drive, I know I shouldn't really. Everybody else does the same though, and our government wants to pump even more oil and gas, so it can't be that serious. I get all these kind of things, and so we live off the oil, and yet we criticize it. So if you are a prominent climate communicator, and then you fly around the world to communicate the climate, then immediately there's some bugger who wants to take you on the dissonance, right? And of course they do that with all prominent communicators, such as Leonardo DiCaprio, who came out on the Oscars very clearly, and the day after he came out on the Oscars, he was pushed back by social dissonance, because I care so much about climate change, this is how I live, you know. That is a very effective way for people to keep climate change facts at a distance, by either self-justifying themselves or accusing the other of being worse. So, the main thing about dissonance is that it creates this uncomfortable feeling that I want to get rid of. So if I have high emissions, and also I've learned that CO2 leads to climate disruption, what I will try to do is to explain away this by one of four strategies, typically. I can say one, that, you know, my emissions are really small. And my neighbor has a bigger car than I do. And if I get rid of my car, if I fly less, nothing is going to change. Because the problem isn't my emissions, it's theirs. that's how the brain works. Automatically by itself, it comes up with a host of self-justifications. Our brains are very good at excusing ourselves. I can also try to change the importance of one of these. I can, for example, take this one. I can say, this is not so sure after all. I've heard or I've read scientists say that it's actually the sun. It's variations in the activity of the sun. Or I can say, well, actually, there's an ice age 10,000 years ago, and the ice age ended, but there were no cars or planes around then. So why did it change back then? I think it's natural variations. Must be. If I really want to believe that, what happens? And this is interesting from a psychological point of view, because, there's been a steady supply of misinformation from the anti-climate lobbies and the industries. But why do people want to believe it? It's a supply side. What is the demand side for this? Why do people want to believe it? And the reason, the demand side here, comes from benefit. If I start to doubt this, my dissonance goes away and I feel better. I can go on with my life as I usually do. I don't have to fight for change. I can be free, so to speak, of the trouble that climate communicators are creating inside me. So that's how it's easy to believe anti-climate messages, because it gives me a psychological benefit right away. Third, I can add additional cognitions. A third part, for instance, I can say, well, I've installed solar panels on my roof now, so my extra hot vacation to Thailand doesn't really matter. Or I can, this is quite common as well. For instance, if you go shopping and you feel, oh, maybe I shouldn't shop so much. But then if people give like a few 40, 50 euros maybe to some charity first, and then they can go shopping, and then they have no bad conscience for their shopping. It's called moral licensing. Or smokers who want to quit smoking, they can say to themselves, I've trained so well today, and now I've deserved a smoke. So these kind of things happen all the time. It's not just in climate, but these are the three main strategies we use to get rid of the dissonance. And the main effect of this is that it weakens people's climate attitudes. All of them. So just pushing the knowledge component doesn't create an attitude shift, because the behavior component of the attitude pulls them back. So behavior is often much more powerful in determining attitude than knowledge is. And just pushing out the facts doesn't make people change their mind if their behaviors are locked to a lifestyle from the previous century. So, fourth, denial. Denial, I feel, has been overused as a kind of way to point fingers. They are the climate deniers, they shouldn't do this. It's almost a synonym as being stupid or immoral or ignorant. They are climate deniers. And it doesn't really help our conversation, because originally the concept of denial is not about just saying no or being ignorant or saying the opposite. It's about both knowing something and not knowing at the same time. So it's a social contract, so to speak, about what we are allowed to speak about and what we are not allowed to speak about. And if you speak about it in an area where this social contract is prevalent, then you're surrounded by silence. Typically, the words don't resonate. And people start to just speak about something else. So maybe we should rather speak of resistance rather than denial, because that's less kind of polarizing. I can also feel resistance in taking in the full ramifications of my climate knowledge. Like knowing that my younger child will probably, when he's old, live in a world that's warmer than the previous 800,000 years or more, and I was part of that. It's kind of hard to live with that knowledge. But we do need to take it in. But yet, speaking about climate change becomes very important, and that's why I brought this on for this audience, because unless we speak about it, it will disappear even more from people's awareness. And one study from the Yale Climate Change program on communication shows that only 1 in 5 Americans hear people they know talk about global warming at least once a month. Almost half never hear about climate change. Once a year or less. Never, I'm not sure. So this is where I think you guys can make a big difference. Because if nobody speaks about it, it will disappear. And denial is a mechanism, a social contract, that helps subdue certain topics and raise others. Finally, there's this issue of identity. Somewhat related to denial, but not completely. Because identity psychology, or personality psychology, looks into how people view themselves and understand the world in relationship to their own values. This has to do with what kind of values do I define myself through. Can be a little bit abstract, but I'll explain it quite simply. If you want to understand identity, have a look at the car industry. Because the car industry discovered 40, 50 years ago that they don't sell cars. What do they sell? They sell an expression, an opportunity to express who you are. So now you have an opportunity. Are you this kind of person or this kind of person? If there are 2 types of person in the world, there's this type and that type. Which type are you? You don't have to raise your hands. And somehow these machines express a certain set of cultural values that people identify with. And what happens if this type of person tries to speak about the climate with this type of person? Imagine this guy stopping the car and then talking about climate with this kind of guy. Well, now there's an alternative to fight, and I'll show you a little video that I found online which kind of perfectly illustrated this psychology in action. And if ever you're flooded with hate messages in your inbox after mentioning climate change, this is a dynamic at work. Here you have a Prius person hitting the... Unfortunately, there's no sound here, but I'll speak. So, pushing up to the bumper, some traffic behind this one. Now, this guy gets annoyed. Why is he pushing into my bumper? What does this Prius want? But luckily, this car has a Prius repellent installed. A repellent, like a mosquito spray. So, if I hit the button on the keyboard, on the dashboard, I get a lot of extra soot coming out. A lot of diesel goes into the engine. And lots and lots of lovely soot comes out and spreads over the car behind me. And then I can laugh. Easy. We got him. This is called rolling coal. It costs only $500, and by putting it in your car, you can now spray the car behind you with a big cloud of soot. Showing what you mean about these kind of people who come and criticize my values, my identity. They think they are better than me, but now I want to show them back. This is where climate discourse gets ugly, as Mike showed with his fist. Yes. And the reason is that climate communicators just don't come with science. It is perceived as if they are criticizing who I am, my identity, my value system. And that is something that is terrible, because if you're then talking about solutions such as electric cars or flying less or eating less meat, or even worse, supporting increased taxation and more government regulation, then it must be wrong, because I am a supporter of small government and big cars. Here comes these people who say we want a big government and small cars. They must be wrong. If they then talk about climate science, I will use all my intelligence to explain away those facts. And this is one study by Dan Kahane, also at Yale. He asked a few thousand people, is the Earth getting warmer, A, mostly because of human activity from burning fossil fuels, or B, because of natural variations in the Earth's environment? Well, the more education people have, the more science intelligence, the higher probability of a correct response, A. But if you split that on average into values, so this is the individualistic values, the conservative free market values, and this is liberal values or egalitarian values, then the more egalitarian values you have and the education you have, the quicker you get the correct response. But if you have individualistic values and free market values, the more education you have, the more science intelligence you have, the more wrong you get.
So for the Americans, we really do hope that the president will be very low educated, because that will be better for our understanding of climate, right? If he's very well educated, then we have... No, that's
only for Americans.
For American, no,
well, this is not just for Americans. This shows a general psychological dynamic that is called in psychology confirmation bias, which has to do with that if I hear a fact that corresponds with what I already believe in, the values that I say are me, then I will want to take them in. But if I hear some facts that contradict what I really believe in, I will try to push against those facts. So what we say here is that identity will override knowledge. Or to put it differently, my values will eat any facts for breakfast. So this was a quite rapid walking through of the main 5 barriers against climate communications. What about the solutions? What do we know? How can we break through these barriers? Or maybe even go around them? Because we know from psychology that if I as a coach or a therapist want to change my patient too quickly, what happens is that as quickly as I point out what he's doing wrong, he will push me back.
Oh.
So strange. Thanks for pointing that out. So how do we bypass it? Sorry?
See what you did wrong?
Yeah. Exactly, that's it. And we have enough reports. So we don't solve these barriers by pushing out more reports, and that's been the kind of basic response from the climate science community. If they don't believe us, let's make another report where the facts are even stronger. Let's shout even louder. Let's do it again. And so if what you do doesn't work, why don't we try something else? And luckily, this is the new climate communication toolbox that more and more people are both exploring and using. And what I have done as a science communicator is to collect studies and examples in my book about documented, evidence-based solutions that create engagement. And the main 5 strategies that seem to create engagement can be summed up in these 5 keywords. You have to make climate science more social, make it simple to take climate action, more supportive framings, better storytelling, and then signals that are experienced as personal and relevant, not distant and abstract. First, social. What does it mean to make climate science social? And again, this is one of the reasons why I come here, because I think meteorologists and weather forecasters are eminently placed to make this put it into a social context. Social is what I believe other people are doing. We should stop using images of glaciers and ice and faraway weather patterns, also this satellite view of cyclones. It's just too far away. We should use close-ups of the people we know, people we care about, and we should use social norms, social media, make it more local, and put some flow and glow and fun into it. I like one particularly initiative in Bergen in Oslo, where they have done away with climate protest. Their new slogan is "From protest to party." And then each spring they have kind of bring out the bikes and they help each other with fixing the bikes, or they do it in the autumn, or they make apple juice together, whatever, and then they throw a party at the same time. So creating community around the actions, and that is also creating social norms. One study, for instance, from this Journal of Economic Geography, looked at how solar panels spread geographically. So if this one house got solar panels, what happens is that the likelihood of these other houses also getting solar panels goes up with like 8 to 9 times higher probability than the average house in the country. So it seems that rooftop solar is contagious. It spreads like a virus, like a fever, influenza. So we also see this in Norway now in terms of the take-up of electric cars. If there is a road with neighbors and then one gets an electric car, the probability of the neighbors getting an electric car is way higher than the rest of the country. So one other study was done to see if you could get households to reduce their power consumption. So they had 4,000 households in this study, and one group were told to save power for the sake of sustainability and the earth, because it's good and the right thing to do. The second group were asked to, can you please save your power because it's better for the future generations. You should think about your children. Right? Third group were asked to save power because it's profitable. It saves you money. Fourth group were asked, or they weren't asked, they were told how much their power how power they use compared to their neighbors. And which of these conditions do you think had the highest reduction or the longest reduction in power consumption?
Number 4.
Number 4. It wins each time. Some economists always say it's number 3, but they don't get it. Because this is how we humans, we're not first of all rational, first of all we're social animals. We care about what those people close to me are doing. And the main reason this works so well for climate communication is that it breaks the distance barrier. It's no longer abstract, far into the future. It is something that my friends and neighbors are doing, and therefore it's near and personal. The way it has been communicated, particularly by the company O-Power, which commercializes this, is that this is my consumption, this is efficient neighbors, this is all neighbors. So I get 2 smileys over here on this feedback. If I get below average, there is no frowns. I agree, no? Because if I get a frown, what happens is that, oh, what a load of rubbish this is. I'm not interested. So Bob Cialdini, the professor who started this tradition, he said, people don't just want to conserve energy, they want to be acknowledged for conserving energy. One Norwegian app, I think this has been developed in different places all over the world now. I don't know if there's any in Belgium. I think this is called Weespire in the US, but in Norway it's called Ducky. And what I can do is I can bike to job, I can have a vegetarian dinner, I can save someone lighting, I can have a train rather than plane, I have a no shopping day. And if I hit these, I can compare myself. I get points with my friends and groups, and suddenly we have a social network of people who then acknowledges each other's actions. This is what we call social norms, and it really gets people fired up when it comes to doing climate change. One initiative also is that to use more sports people, because sports people reach audiences that climate scientists never reach. So in the US, this is Green Sports Alliance that makes the sports event green. So recycling and renewable energy and everything, and then they try to get the sports stars on board to help with the climate communication, to have them say what they do. Because people identify with them to a much larger extent than they do with other messengers. So changing the messenger is one key here. So that's social. What about the simple strategy? I think I will be very brief on that because I don't think meteorologists and weather forecasts can do much about it. But I just want to explain briefly what it is. Today, it's very difficult to be climate friendly in your actions. What we can do rather is to use something called nudging or behavioral economics to change how people make decisions. For instance, like this study, this is at a hotel where there's a buffet, and if people get a large plate, they tend to put more food than they need on it. So this is what you need for getting full, maybe. But if this one looks empty, so people tend to put more food on it. First, they try to reduce food waste by saying a sign, please don't take more food than you need. It had less than 1% effect on the measured food waste. Then they changed the plate size from this to that one, and that took down the food waste by 20%. So if you make it easy for people not to take more food than they need, then you reduce food waste much more efficiently than trying any cognitive or moral approaches to it. Also the same thing with printing. A lot of paper is wasted with single-sided printings. If you change the default to make it, you have to click to get one-sided printing, then it changes behaviors. People use 15% less paper, and if applied to all US offices or all EU offices, about 1 million tons of CO2 could be saved each year, just by changing a little flip on the printer. So I'll skip this and go to the supportive framing, because I think this is the most important for you as a communication community. If we should avoid doom, if we should avoid being too negative, how can we speak about climate change in a way that creates engagement? What do we know from research on this? And first, I'd like to do a little experiment with you to illustrate what framing is. I'm sure you heard about framing, but let me briefly bring it up. The experiment goes like this. Are you ready? Do not think of an elephant. No, do not think of an elephant. And in particular, do not think of a pink elephant. So now you have been framed. Suddenly there is this elephant in the room. Whether you want to think of it or not to think of it, it's here, right? And the trouble with climate communication is that it has been framed in the wrong way. Because for 25 years, at least Western politicians have been speaking about how costly climate change mitigation is, how much... Oh, here's the pink elephant. And it's job killing to use expenses on any climate change mitigation or any climate change initiatives. So it's very costly. And then people have to say, it's not costly. You get my point? So by environmentalists, by accepting this framing by economists, or saying how it's not costly, or trying to discuss those numbers, suddenly they have been discussing this elephant, which is the wrong frame to speak about climate change. So do not go into the costly debate or the catastrophic framing. We should get this discourse onto our own type of frames. And there are three frames which we know work. The first and foremost is the health framing. I hope you can make it a reality that in the future, when the first thing people hear about global warming, what they say is health issues, rather than ice. Because we need to change the discourse into one where taking care for the climate is something we do, we're taking care about our health. Health engages people, and increasing heat stress is increasing violence, decreasing life spans, it's more pollen, more ticks, all kind of problems when the climate goes awry for our children, our friends, ourselves, our bodies. To bring it into the body. Right, Helga?
Yes.
Yes. We discussed this yesterday, you see, that's why I went to. That's what to do. Climate is about caring for the health of people. If we can get that across, we shift the debate. Second, it's about insurance. You know, like Sandy was about $60 billion of damage. And that was 12 times the amount of the damage when the World Trade Center came down due to the terrorist attack of 9/11. 12 times as much. But did the US respond in the same way? No. 2 wars for the one and nothing for the other. Except that more and more people are understanding that tackling climate is about risk management. So this shift from uncertainty and catastrophe to risk management and insurance is a major also shift in how we speak about the issue. Third and finally, we should speak about climate as opportunities for making a better lives for people, better lives in the sense of smarter, more convenient, less polluted, better jobs, better economics. And I use this in the case sometimes to get this point over, because this is thing called solar roadways, which came up as an idea. This is not asphalt, and this is not paint, this is LED, and these are solar panels, and they're hexagonal. So you just, rather than putting asphalt, you would have solar panels on the roof, and that could generate more power than the cars need to run on them. So suddenly you could have regenerative traffic. Electric cars running on the solar power made from roads. Now, when economists saw this, and also they're smart, so if you walk over here, this starts to blink red, and if in the morning, if there are bikes, you can make the bike lane broader, and if the traffic goes this way out of the city, you can turn the lanes. So this is a smart road. So we have smart iPhones, smart houses, why can't we have smart roads? Many people heard about this the first time and said, wow, this is interesting. But what did the economists say, do you think? Costly, money, too expensive, it's very costly. So 25 reports came, killing these solar roadways. It's a stupid idea, it will never work, too expensive. And now comes my point. People love the opportunity. So rather than listening to the economists speaking about cost, they started throwing money at this company. So it became one of the most successful crowd-funded initiatives on Indiegogo ever. They got millions of dollars more than they asked for, about 3 times as much. So it illustrates the psychology of opportunities. If you go with the opportunity and create this wish for people to join, then they will get engaged and not turn off. What I think got people engaged in this was that they saw an opportunity for a better world, a smarter world, where there's zero emissions and better lives. It's a very visual representation. And of course Tesla are experts on doing this. They're not selling batteries, they're selling a new lifestyle where you can get freedom, free market energy, and you can make your own power, store it, and run on it. So they're using this opportunity of taking a boring product, just as a battery, and making it into a lifestyle opportunity. Experts on doing that, just after Apple. Google, of course, is trying to do this with the Internet of Things, joining us, and then in China, they're finding smarter ways of getting around, such as electric motorbikes. They're selling like 50 million electric bikes per year now. 50 million electric bikes per year. So these are endless opportunities, and we should speak more about them because they are supportive framings. Storytelling is about, I see my time is running out, so I'll very briefly just say that we need people to tell new stories about how we improve our cities and our lives, particularly in the West, since that we have such trouble with accepting climate change. These are smart cities, how they can look at the future when we improve the quality of life while taking down our ecological footprint. So we need better storytellers that can make this image of what a society looks like, that is both low emissions and better in so many ways than today. How can we make that shift? And then finally we need signals that would help us see and experience the progress towards these low carbon cities. In particular, the trouble has been with the climate science that we have been using indicators such as ppm levels in the atmosphere. We have been speaking about sea level rise in inches per decade, or global surface average temperature change per century. And these kind of signals are impossible for people to relate to. So what we need are signals that are relatable, personal, feels near. And here's one example from Oslo, where I live. I'm biker number 1549, because when I pass this, it counts me. And then I can see how we are collectively changing compared to last year, etc. Also in buildings, maybe make the building smart. It shows the power usage and the power regeneration. So each time I walk into a building, I can see how energy efficient it is or how it's performing relative to today. And then finally we could do this not just on an individual or a building level, but we could do it on the level of cities, such as Copenhagen, which is creating more value and at the same time taking down emissions at a rate which would make it possible for them to join or reach the Paris Agreement of 2 degrees, less than 2 degrees change, if everybody does this type of performance. Economic growth combined with reduced emissions at this rate. So, this makes me come to my conclusion. Are humans inevitably short term? Remember my first question? What do we know now? Well, first, the answer is yes. As long as we get only rational facts, unfortunately, humans are insufficiently fired up to create a lasting engagement in long-term thinking. However, if humans have conducive conditions, such as social norms, supportive frames, simple actions, better stories and signals, these 5 conditions, which makes climate communication human-friendly, suddenly shift our thinking in everyday life, so we do take action for the long term. We know that now. If you put humans into these kind of conditions, they will take action for the long term. So now the question becomes, how can we create these conducive conditions? And what we do that, individual actions that I propose do not solve the climate problem at all, but what they do is to build this bottom-up support so politicians can do the right solutions and at the same time be re-elected. Because they can't do that today, and that's why it doesn't happen. So this is how climate psychology can help change climate communication, and I think if we can shift the social norms towards in this direction, then we will be able to solve and get higher support for climate policies also in Western democracies. Thank you.
Can we get the sheets some way, somehow,
course.
sometime,
Yes.
somewhere?
I'm happy to share these slides with Malali. Do you have any? Yeah.
It will be in the closed part of the website. We will put all the slides in the closed part of the website. You can have it afterwards, and you have the whole lecture on Facebook Live.
So I think we have some time for questions. Yes.
In the previous slide, GVA stands for?
Gross value added. It's the concept you use. It's like the GDP, but applied for a city. So the GDP of the city. Yes.
Hi, my name is Michael with the World Meteorological Organization. Seems to be one of the challenges for this community is that their expertise that they're known for is telling you about the bad impact of weather and climate. So how does, do you have any thoughts on how this community, given what they're known for, can get in more of that positive destination?
I hope, I don't know, I hope there were lots of suggestions from other people because I'm not a weather forecaster. But if it's possible to not just tell the weather but also showcase how some solutions create better lives for people in your area to deal with these kind of weather conditions. So combine weather forecasting with showcasing good opportunities for smarter lifestyles. That is, as I say, optional. Because I think I discussed that with somebody here the other day, I think it was Mike. Now people have apps for weather forecasting. Why should they bother watching you guys if you don't add something else? And I think telling these stories about how people deal with these issues in smarter, better ways that both gains their community and their own lives. These are the cases I would hope that you could lift up. So why not include? Sorry?
Make it more personal.
Yeah, make it more personal. And go out there, meeting people who are very comfortable in their homes, despite the heat wave. Maybe because their housing has this passive temperature regulation. They use no energy, but their house is still cool. How cool isn't that? I don't know. Same thing with flooding. Where are those people who are not just suffering, but those who are dealing with it in a much better way? There are, for instance, solutions such as structural materials who help absorb rain flooding and then release it gradually. So you avoid this flush flooding from built infrastructure. You always see weather forecasters or climate messengers standing, in the flood up to their waist. Why don't we show these positive solutions more? That's my hope, yes?
Expanding upon that, Jill has done this, but one of the ways you can tie weather is through how weather is powering a lot of our energy now with sun and with wind, and that's right in a weather person's alley. So that's a way to tie that in.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Jill has done stuff with like solar forecasting and how much has been created that day. So there's ways to do that too.
As I said, I'm not an expert in weather forecasting, not at all. But what I do a little bit about is research on how to engage people. And from positive psychology comes this very interesting finding. There seems to be a golden rule of 3-to-1, meaning that for each alarming or threatening bit of information you come with, you should give 3 solutions. So it's not that we should stop speaking about the seriousness and the severity of climate change. But it is that at least 75% of the attention and the shall we say, time should be spent speaking about how this can be utilized in a constructive, solution-oriented way. Yes?
Another question, because it's another. It's hard to bring it to the people in Austria, because many people in Austria, global warming for Austria is not only bad. There are many goodies in global warming for the tourism, for the nature, agriculture, and things like that. So we have not only the problem to bring them solutions and raise awareness of, hey, for Austria it's not the biggest problem, but there are many countries and people from countries where it is now a real hardcore problem. So how can I bring, yes, the stories from the people, but when many people say, oh, I don't care because for me it's summer, yeah, it's hotter, it's better, it is kind of this.
So, is the question not whether you should mention that or not mention it, or?
I should mention it. but how do you communicate that? You told us you should bring the problem to your neighbor. You
yes.
talk about the people
and solutions to your neighbor. Yes.
So, but when many of your neighbors say, yeah, it's super.
Less snow shuffling in the winter,
yes.
and, yeah, like we Norwegians, right? Yes. Well, I would say it's very short-term approach, and I think that the health disadvantages will greatly outnumber the few disadvantages, and that anyway, eating less meat, a more plant-based diet, and biking more and driving less car is good both for your body, your health, and the climate at the same time. Yeah. It's getting warm in here, isn't it? At least I'm very warm. Local warming.
Local warming.
Yes. One last question, or any ideas or reflections?
Maybe as I mean, I haven't read the book. I probably will now that I know about it. But I think it would be a great idea to join, and work together with someone that works in television, with a weather forecaster, and do like a follow-up on how they benefited or how to develop more their storytelling or something along those lines, just to put into practice.
Yes.
I think that would be the next step. I mean, how well we can all put this into practice.
Exactly. And that's why I think Jill does a great job bringing you together like this, to share those kind of experiences. What I've just done now is not, I don't have the finished solutions. I'm giving you an insight into the psychology of what we now know, how people respond to this. And now it's up to you guys to figure out, how do we avoid these barriers? How can we exploit these solutions? Because you can also use these barriers here, as I showed you, as success criteria. So when you do some kind of new piece of climate communication, why don't you just have this quick list? Do we now trigger the distance barrier? Or do we make it near personal? Do we now play too much on doom and catastrophe? How much of it? Is it more than 80% doom and catastrophe in our content? How much do we approach the dissonance? Do we give people an opportunity to do something? Or is it only pushing the bad knowledge, or the bad hypocrite feeling, the bad conscience, without giving people opportunity for simple actions? Are we speaking about it, or are we speaking about the weather, not mentioning the relationship to climate? Are we addressing people's identity issues? Do we speak in a way that will alienate people, or are we speaking more like Tesla, who will speak both to liberals and conservatives, both to individualistic people and to egalitarian people, because this is a solution both for freedom and for society? So can we phrase our message so that we don't alienate one half of the population? So you can use these not just as barriers, but as success criteria to tick off on when you create your climate communication. So that will be the final word. Thank you.
Thank you, Per.
That's fun. That's so sorry. I'm sorry because I do know that you have a lot of questions, but we have two other speakers.
Yes.
I wanted to bring climate change a bit closer to you with a Belgian beer.
Oh.
It's a sparkling beer, I mean wine, sorry.
It's
Sparkling
wine.
wine, it's not beer. I respect your intolerance for beer. And this is some little souvenir.
Oh. Thank you.
I will now, okay,